Good morning, SIEEJ.
Morning.
We gotta do that again. Good morning, SIEEJ.
Morning.
So I'm trying to make sure I don't get any feedback. So as you all know, as educators, scholars, scholar practitioners, students, researchers, readers of research, we do a lot of talking about students and students' experience, right? But how often do we actually engage the actual students who we're talking about, right? The work that we're actually doing and these creative and very necessary conversations, how often do we get a chance to actually hear from the students who are directly impacted by the changes that we're looking to make, policy and otherwise, and or racism, right? We make these assumptions kind of based on our own thoughts and the things that we know, but we don't ever actually hear from students unless something has happened, right? Then we hear from students, we see the protests, we see the student activists, but what would happen if we allowed ourselves to be proactive instead of reactive in those instances? So the point of this amazing combination of students is to give all of you a first-hand bird's eye perspective on how these things directly impact our students. We have with us today 4 undergraduate students, 2 graduate students, 1 recent alumnus. So it'll be an opportunity for you guys to hear from their side of things, and I'll allow some time after the questions for you guys to ask questions, advice, encouragement, and anything else. So with me we have Brianna. Raise your hand. We have Kara, Joshua, Joanna, Elizabeth, Tamir, and Annalisa. Please welcome me. So you guys kind of have an idea of what we're getting ready to discuss. So what I'd like you all to do is kind of give the audience an opportunity to get to know you a little bit better. So if you can tell us like your name, classification, where you're from, and your program of study. You can start.
Okay. Good morning. I'm Kara Hackett, and I am a grad student here at AU, and I'm in the MA in Journalism and Digital Storytelling program. And for my undergrad degree, I went to the Florida A&M University.
Hi everyone, my name is Brianna Isaacs. I just graduated with my master's degree in International Peace and Conflict Resolution. I received my undergrad at Spelman College. And it's nice to meet you. Yes, I heard someone.
Good morning, everyone. I'm Annalisa Jenkins. I am an undergraduate student in the School of Public Affairs.
Yeah, you go.
Good morning, everyone. My name is Tamir Harper, class of 2022 at AU, studying education and public relations from the city of Philadelphia.
My name is Elizabeth Dietz. I'm also an undergraduate in the class of 22, and I'm in the School of International Service.
Good morning, everyone. My name is Joshua Dantzler. I am a rising junior in the School of Public Affairs from South Carolina.
Hi, my name is Joanna Sylvain, and I'm an undergraduate here at American University in the School of International Service.
All right, so the first question I have for the students is, what has been your biggest challenge pursuing your degree in today's climate?
I think one of my biggest challenges is definitely having access to resources. And it's almost as if like you're in a zoo where you can see what's behind the bars, but you aren't quite sure how to actually get there. So perfect example with grad school, of course you need funding, you need ongoing scholarships. And there is a scholarship for my program, but I reached out to my program director. I said, there was no application information, there's no contact information. How do I apply for this? Because I need the money. And she said, and the response was, well, you have to know the board members, and they have to know you. And you have to be voted on by faculty, and there is no application process. So it's like, my response, how do I have access to the money if I don't know the board members or whatnot? And there was never a response to the email. And there's only 8 of us in my particular cohort. 7 out of the 8 of us are of color. And we've all had similar experiences with trying to attain funding, and there's just never any answer, or there's no application process, or you have to know the board members, but we don't even know where to begin on even making these connections in the first place. So I would definitely say just access to resources is my biggest issue in grad school.
I would say something similar. So for my program specifically, like, you have to have internships. You have to go abroad at some point for your work, and you have to be working. But in DC culture is you have to go out and network and drink, and you have to work those free internships. And for a lot of us, you can't afford to work free internships. You have to have other jobs to support the internship. And so it's like you're constantly balancing, okay, well, I need this to get there, but I can't afford to get there. So how am I going to get there? Like, what can I do? And so that's probably one of the biggest challenges for many of my cohorts, especially like Black women.
For me, it's been kind of understanding if I'm in the right program and if I should pursue a different degree or double major. If I want to pursue something in law, okay, maybe political science, but then I also have an interest in education. It's like, okay, should I double major? Should I minor? And then the different requirements that come with that. In addition to that, it's the experience that comes with it. So at what point do I intern? Who do I contact? Is this the right path for me? Is this the professor that can write the letter of recommendation? And how do I know that, this letter of recommendation will ensure that I can get that internship or whatnot? Also with that, it's, I know that I'm at this great institution, but post-grad, what does that look like for me? Will I land that job? So it's kind of like navigating the undergraduate experience with education that I have and the resources, but also worrying about the post-grad.
I'll follow up on that one. And right now I have a dream of being a teacher. And as I oftentimes think of what I'm going to do after AU, it's a debate of if I'm going to go straight through and hopefully pursue a PhD, but it's also a sit-down debate of, will I be able to pass the praxis? I'm a terrible test taker, and I know that about myself. So praxis, we know, Black and brown folks don't pass it as easily. So I oftentimes have to sit down and debate and figure out if it's really what I want to do, and also the internship piece of I need to make myself marketable outside of the education field, just in case I do not pursue education because I can't pass the praxis or I can't land a job in a school that is willing to pay me a reasonable amount for the cost of living in today's country. So yeah.
I would also piggyback off Annalisa's answer and say that within classroom settings, in classes for my major specifically, I often find myself, listening to what my peers have to say and how far advanced they are on these really complex topics. And I'm like, I don't have this same background information, or I don't have the same thoughts to put forward. Does that mean that this isn't the major for me? Does that mean that I'm not qualified to be in the classroom with all these other intelligent people? And then the more that you start to question yourself and get into that mindset, you only, bring yourself farther back down. So it's being reassure myself that this is where I'm supposed to be and I do have a place in this classroom.
I would say, like people have mentioned before, I think one of the biggest challenges in pursuing my degree in this climate, twofold, one being representation and the second being mentorship. I think oftentimes we forget the importance of representation, even on a collegiate level and a college level. However, it matters. And so if I'm not having professors of color, if I'm not having faculty of color, if I'm not having staff of color to be a resource for me, I don't feel comfortable with going out and seeking resources or feeling comfortable finding people to, help me get this internship. To help me get this job. And so I think we don't just need, like I said, representation in terms of professors of color, but we also need staff of color and faculty and just all across the board. I'm going into my junior year in the School of Public Affairs and I haven't had one professor of color, and so we really, and if I want to pursue political science as a career, if I want to one day become a political science professor or just get a master's in political science, but I don't see any in my program or in my school, that is an issue. And I know they exist, but I haven't had them yet, and they're really far and few in between. So I think the biggest challenge that I faced in my degree is just having representation and having folks that I can actually go to get mentorship, and to have folks I can go to that can be resources.
My started in high school. The president of our school would have lunch with the seniors, and I remember distinctly sitting next to a male peer of mine who had said that he had gotten a sports scholarship to go to Stanford, and the president congratulated him on it, and then it was my turn to speak about my plans for the next year and for my undergraduate experience, and I said that I came from a family that encouraged me to get out of the state of Minnesota, which is where I'm from, and go somewhere else. And the president looked at me and he said, "It's a mistake to go out of the state for college." So I think that it's this authority figure who's telling me like that's a mistake and you're going to lose all these resources that you have here and these connections you've made. And so I started to question that, and I really started to think like maybe I won't be able to find my place somewhere else, and maybe coming from a state where the norm is to go to school kind of in the region or to go to our state school, that what is the experience for me going to be breaking that norm? And so I think that my biggest challenge was kind of getting there, and especially getting here without a college counseling department in my high school, and with facilitators and staff members who weren't supporting the choice to kind of break out of that comfort zone and do something out of the norm in terms of my undergraduate degree experience.
Thanks, y'all. And I don't know about you guys, but I heard two themes that emerged. One is resources and two is representation. Show of hands for all of you who know who to talk to when you have those questions.
It varies.
Kind of, right? But not yes, not a firm yes, kind of. Okay. And kind of in reference to this conversation, as we discuss racism and the impact that it has on education, I want to ask you guys something. And that is specifically, do you remember a specific experience where you encountered something or witnessed something and you wish you had responded differently? Anybody?
Okay, I'll talk about a recent experience. So my last semester, you have to do a practicum for your, a capstone. They say your last year, your master's degree. And so I was doing a practicum of 8 people. 4 of us were of color, and then 4 were not. And our professor was a white woman. So we had split off into 3 different groups, and one of us was doing a portion of we were all doing a portion of the project. And one of our group members was very volatile, and she was very aggressive and not really working as a team member. And so she did some very backhanded stuff to our group. And then when I approached her about it, she cried, and then we had a meeting with the teacher, and the teacher basically pointed the finger at me, blamed me, said it was my fault, and that there was no accountability on her part. Mind you, the student refers to the professor in her first name. They hang out, they have drinks, and they do stuff like that. So I already knew going in what the situation was. And so what she did was, instead of addressing the girl, she instead split us all up, made me do another project in a week turnaround. And then the next week, because she had an aggression towards me, called me out in front of the entire class, told me how bad my project was. And so, yeah, I cried for an entire weekend. I was like, I'm going home. I don't want to do this anymore. And so, what I did was, what I wish I had have done was, I wish I would have called the professor out in that space at that time. I wish I had gone above her head and told someone. But at this school, even if you go above someone's head, a lot of times at the graduate level, nothing is done. They're friends with those people, they're tenured, nothing is going to happen at least in my experience when I've done it before. And so, yeah, that's what I wish I had done. And she gave me a lower grade than everybody in the rest of the class. So.
Kara?
Yeah, so I have a lot of experiences. And I'll go back to come forward. I would definitely remember being in 7th grade science. And I'll make this connect, but I definitely remember being in 7th grade science and kids just goofing off in the class. And it was one boy in particular who was always bouncing off the wall, just regular 7th grade kid stuff. And the teacher rather, white woman, walked up to him and said, "You're not going to graduate. You're only going to go to jail." And she separated him and put him in the back of the classroom, away from everyone else. And to like that whole scenario just stuck in my mind all the way now until grad school, that I can still easily retell something that happened like that in seventh grade science. But I've had like this reoccurring issue where either I've experienced or my peers have experienced teachers just shutting them down, and just instances where the teachers are just not keeping their personal biases at home. Even on my graduate level courses here, I'm in the one of the journalism programs. I've had professors knock down my story ideas, story pitches, because it wasn't something that they believe was going on, or things that they believe weren't issues. Perfect example with the Black women and the maternity rates and the deaths and whatnot. And I wanted to do a story on how Black women are now turning to more doulas in support of this. And the professor was like, well, I don't think that that's a thing. So no, you can't do that story. And then 2 weeks later, there's a story in Washington Post, Washington City Paper, several other organizations, NPR. And I just felt so defeated. And I didn't know what to do, because these are not my experiences, but people that I know are like cousins or whatnot, and they have been in serious issues like health concerns. And then I have someone telling me that's not a real thing. And I just felt so invalidated and just felt so unseen in that moment.
Samir.
On kind of what experience is best, but I'm going to do the undergrad. So I just completed my first year here at AU, and I'm a first generation college student from a majority Black city. Went to a super diverse high school, and I came to AU, Tinleytown. If you've walked around Tinleytown, it's very white and wealthy. If you walk around AU's campus, we have some work to do. And I suffered from like imposter syndrome. My first year, I struggled, and I oftentimes was the only Black male in classrooms. And that experience is real. And I was in a special course, and we started talking about Black people getting stopped with 2 white professors. It was a team talk course, and we were talking about Black people getting stopped, and then they wanted us to go into the Salvadorian community in DC and interview people off the street. And this is an all-white class. It's maybe 5 Black people and people of color. And I felt uncomfortable. I don't feel as though we, as people that is at an institution that costs over $60,000, should be walking into a community that has already been disrupted and go interview them and ask them about their experiences. Coming from a Black community, that's the first sign of gentrification usually, when people want to come in and hear about your experience and begin talking about it. But I still did it. Instead of challenging that professor and saying, well, we're talking about gentrification and we're talking about Jane Jacobs, but we're not listening to what they are saying, Trimbath. We're not listening to what they're saying, and we're sending students that aren't from DC, that are from the upper middle class, to these neighborhoods. So I wish I challenged. I wished I pushed back and called out what I seen, instead of being the student that I wasn't taught to be. I was taught to challenge and push back and say, are we looking at it with this view? But instead I conformed and said, well, I'm just going to do it and get this grade and hope for the best, when I shouldn't have done that.
Elizabeth?
I would say this kind of goes back to my answer for the first question, and knowing when and do I have a place in a classroom. And one of my first classes, first semester, was about the politics of international law surrounding genocide. And it was a topic that about half the class, I would say, went into knowing nothing, but saying, this is a really interesting topic, like I'm interested in exploring more. And the other half had either taken classes on it, done a lot of personal research, something along those lines. And for the first multiple weeks, this was a block class, so we only met once a week. The class was driven by like 2 guys in the class who seemed to have a ton of background information, and the professor who would just sit there for like a long time and engage in discussion with these 2 guys in the class who seemed to have a ton of information on it. And I felt super excluded from the classroom. I didn't know what they were talking about. I didn't know how to engage for myself. I had questions, but I was way too embarrassed to ask those questions, to ask for clarification, to step in and say, this doesn't really involve the entire class. How can we make this more engaging for everyone? But I was too embarrassed to say anything. And it was only towards the very end of the semester when I was talking to another peer in my class who said, I felt the exact same way. I wish he would have, went to his office hours and said something. I wish he would have said something during class to ask a question or anything. And the entire class would have improved. So yeah, that's an experience that I had. I wish I just stepped up and it would have improved the entire situation for more than just myself.
Lisa?
So at AU, there is can you hear me? Okay. So at AU, there's a freshman course called AUX. And essentially, it's a first-year seminar course where it's essentially structured for first years to get used to the campus, for them to navigate the resources on campus, and that's like the first semester portion of it. Second semester, it's geared towards difficult conversations and how to talk about race. Now, in my course, there were 3 Black women. One of them was my instructor, and it was a student and myself. There was an incident on campus where a student decided to say the N-word with a hard R, and he was a white student, and he didn't feel as though it was wrong in any way. He was filmed, it went viral on Twitter, and of course, there was a lot of ruckus on campus. I was very vocal about it, not only with my peers, but also within the classroom setting. And in my AUX course, I said that the student should have been expelled, in that where a white student asked, or actually he told me that that would have been too harsh of a punishment if he was expelled. And I said, now, had there not been 3 Black women in this classroom setting, do you think your answer would have changed in any way? And he kind of was, he was struck by it, and he was like, no, yeah, I see what you mean. And I said, yeah, like, oftentimes, well, actually, the majority of the time, it's the Black person trying to teach the white person on what racism is, what microaggressions look like. And I said, like, I shouldn't have to do this. No one should have to do this. All in all, to say that I wish that I didn't have to be that person to always speak on racism or my experience on racism. But I also feel that, like, my white counterpart should understand too, and just like realize that, like, this is a reality, and like, the idea of a white student saying the N-word with a hard R should have just resulted in an expulsion immediately and onward.
Josh?
So that's off. No, you're fine. So I sat. Hello, can you hear me? Yes. So I sat in a public policy class this past semester in the spring, and the professor had asked the class. I was the only Black boy in the public policy class. The professor had asked the class if people could talk about President Obama's policies, and as soon as he asked the class about President Obama's policies, everyone, including himself, turned to me. Like I was the only one who experienced President Obama. And so I just sat there, but I was really angry, and I like ended up, since class ended, just like leaving by myself and texting my friends and congregating with my friends as we typically do after class to talk about the craziness of classes. But I wish that I would have checked not only the class, but also talked to him on his office hours and said, hey, like, I felt uncomfortable. I experienced really a microaggression, and like, please don't single me out, or don't look at me singling me out by your eyes, expecting me to commentate on President Obama's policies when you all can do the same thing too. Just because I'm Black doesn't mean I want to talk about President Obama's policies, and you can as well. So I wish I would have, challenged and brought it up, but I was so frustrated by, just himself even just looking at me, which just like really just shut me down and bothered me.
I think that something can happen here at AU, and it's this assumption that because we're a liberal campus, because we are in a liberal city, because, we're a bunch of poli-sci students, that we're above this kind of environment of like microaggressions and like nothing racist can happen here. And that's so far from the truth. I think that we get in environments, whether it's in the lounge, whether it's in your dorm room, where you're around a couple of friends and, you make a joke or you make a comment and it's like, okay, that joke might have crossed the line, but it's okay because we're among friends. And I think that in those scenarios, I know that because I sit as a person of privilege, I wish that I, in those situations, did more to be like, that's not okay. And you never know who you're talking to, and you never know what those people's experiences are. And maybe even if you think that person's your best friend, you might have just said something that's really hurtful to them. And so I think that I can be somebody that does a better job of not kind of just letting those things slide and being like, you know what, that's not an okay thing to say.
Another theme that just presented itself is racial battle fatigue. And I'm not sure how familiar many of you are with that, but it is not the duty of the oppressed to teach you how to dismantle oppression. So asking students of color how to fix an issue that they did not start and or create is problematic in and of itself. If you are doing that, today is the last day you'll ever do that. In saying that, what are the most critical changes that we can make in higher education in terms of equity, diversity, and inclusion?
I would say two things. One, so I know getting faculty, staff, and professors of color can be challenging and hard in money, salaries, DC, etc., blah, blah, blah. But if you're not going to do that, please diversify your curriculum. I was in the women's gender studies class. I switched out of it because the professor wasn't going to teach or integrate any POC material into the last week. She was going to touch on a lot of stuff in the last weeks rather than, in the beginning. And she had, Jane Eyre and Emily Dickinson in the first weeks, but then was going to get, Audre Lorde in the last week of the syllabus. I'm not going to wait 15 weeks to hit Audre Lorde and, works of Black women in the last weeks when I can get it in the beginning. So please diversify your curriculum. And especially with like in political science courses, I'm tired of reading things by John Locke. I'm tired of reading things by, Rosé, or just like, old fashioned, white authors, so I really want to experience diverse curriculum. And so I think about diversity, equity, inclusion. I think that can be an easy shift in making sure that we are getting, works of people of color and referencing people of color in our materials. And I think also the biggest thing, second thing, is just space. I think students of color need space to build community. Students of color need space to build, to just be, to exist, and to heal, and to really just, have a space away from the day-to-day challenges. And so I think if institutions think about diversity, equity, and inclusion, can really be intentional about the space that we create physically, and not just like by programs, but like physical space, could be a really big thing in terms of retention and success and just enjoyment.
Did you have something?
I can go, yeah. I think that one of the things that has impacted my education here, especially at AU, is creating classrooms where it's okay to talk about hard things and where everybody can feel comfortable talking about them. I had Dr. Otley for my AUX class, and I think it was like the third week here at AU, and he did something as an educator that I had never experienced before in a classroom, and he shared a story about himself where he admitted to us that he felt scared, and he was very vulnerable with us. And I watched, and for the next hour and a half that we were in that classroom, our discussion got better. You can feel when your students are starting to open up, and like when there's that kind of flow and discussion, and even about hard things that can sometimes be sticky to talk about. And he did that, and it struck me, and it took me I thought about it until the next week when we went back to class, why that had impacted me so much. And because I think that a lot of the time the perception of students is like, my teacher walks in the classroom and lectures, and then I don't think about their life after that. It's that kind of weird thing of like when you see your teacher in the grocery store, you're like, your teacher's a real person. And so I think as much as teachers can do to like be vulnerable with their students and be like, if I'm asking you to open up and be in a space where we can talk about these things, teachers need to do that as well.
Brianna.
Oh, you saw me pondering? Joshua hit a lot of them, right? I said your name correctly,
Yes.
right? Okay, good. Definitely the curriculum. Like, there's no reason at AU or School of International Service, like, if I went to HBCU and 80% of my readings are by Black authors, there's no excuse or reason why AU shouldn't have that. Like, there's no reason for that. One of my things is accountability, right? So we have all these policies at AU about if there is an incident of racism, these are the structures. There's never accountability. Those steps are never taken. Like, if I have an issue with a professor, there really isn't a place for me to go. Like, oh, there is, but there's never follow through. And another thing, one issue that I found when I was talking to my friends was like the career counselors. There's no people of color ever. Like, so if I'm looking for a job or employment, like, of course there are wage gaps within race and within gender. So when I'm talking about careers, there's really people that I can't talk to. And also paying doctors and professors the pay that they deserve, people of color. There are so many professors that I love and appreciate that I've never had a class with at a graduate level because they're not put into graduate classes. Like, they're not allowed to teach those classes, and I don't understand why, because I need them. I need to see them.
Timur.
I think they hit on a lot of it. And they hit on a lot of the main points, like definitely the space thing. But hiring people in your enrollment, in your HR department that are people of color, that have different identities than your university, goes a long way. I think one of the things I continue to try to do at AU is to push AU to hire people that understand pedagogy. K through 12 educators are different from higher ed educators. It's a big difference. And I see that at AU. And even being able to now, I had a K through 12 educator, Dr. Dakar, who was an educator before becoming a professor. And the way she taught was without assumption that we knew things and without bias and with love and care. We are still young adults that are trying to figure out what the world is. We're halfway adulting. We are not close to full adults. We are halfway adulting. So until we start hiring educators, they can be black, white, Asian, whatever, as long as they understand pedagogy and the way of teaching and understand that we are not fully adults and still need some more loving than grad school folks sometimes. But our grad school folks need some loving too. But I'm leaving home, first year, first generation. I need my first year educators to really love and understand where I'm coming from. And I may not know APA format because I came from traditional public schools. Wow. So you need to teach APA format. If that's a day of your lesson, you want us to do it, so teach it. So we need people to actually start doing that. And I'll leave with teach people how to have these conversations. Like, regardless if they're a stats professor, they should be having conversations about race if it comes across this campus. If they are a politics professor, everything needs to be talked about. You can't teach when trauma is in the classroom. You cannot teach if trauma is in the classroom.
The word in the room.
So I'm going to just leave it there, and hopefully y'all take that and sit on that one.
Go ahead, Annalisa.
Hello. Okay. Also, I think it's of the utmost important that we make the diversity, equity training mandatory at AU. Like Tamir mentioned, if I have a pre-calc teacher, I need him to be him or her to be trained on diversity, equity, and inclusion just as much as my AUX peer facilitator is. And I need that to be for incoming professors and for those that are tenured, XYZ. It needs to go across the board because these microaggressions and racism occur across the board. So there's no reason why my stats professor is not trained when someone says the N-word and he doesn't know how to reply or say, oh, it's okay, let's just move on, right? and it's not acknowledged. And then it's like, how do I hold him or her accountable for it? So just making that mandatory, because there's no reason it shouldn't be.
Go ahead, Josh.
I literally was just going to say what they just both said. Like, if we're mandating first year students to take these courses, why aren't we mandating professors? I sat at a racial bias in the classroom incident workshop down the hall last fall, and I know that the workshops happen, but they're not mandatory. And so I definitely think we should think about, these optional things, because you can't opt in to teach Black students or opt in to teach students of color. You have them in your classrooms, so learn the material and get right,
Dr. Bettina Love said something yesterday. You can't teach our babies if you don't love our babies. Right? So I think there's something else that jumped out at me as well. For those of you who are critical race theorists, whiteness is property jumped out at hard. Why? Because whiteness is a value that exerts itself anywhere. Education, job, just living, right? And what they're talking about is opportunities and experiences to grow. But if whiteness is at the center of that, it doesn't allow you to be able to see anything else, because you can't unsee something that you refuse to believe. In regard to that, what is the number one way outside of dismantling whitewash curriculum, which I say all the time? I said this yesterday in my session. What is the number one way that we can make a substantive change regarding race relations in higher education? Anybody?
I think that you really have to start by educating yourself before trying to educate any type of incoming class of students. And this is actually something that concerns me on the graduate level, where a lot of times my peers probably are not going to go on to get their PhDs, and they say, I want to be a teacher, or I want to be a professor of whatever. And one particular incident actually really concerns me, because some of my peers and I, within the School of Communication, we were talking about just like old time traditions that our grandparents do. And I mentioned one story about like growing up seeing my grandmother throwing salt over her shoulder while she was cooking. And one girl, she goes, oh, well, does your grandmother practice voodoo? And I was like, voodoo? No, we don't do that. And she continues to say, oh, well, I really want to be a professor. I really want to be an educator. And there's another experience where we were reading Americana. And I chuckled how at one part of the book, the main character, she's like, after she comes to America, she's speaking of like the American trend of carrying water bottles. And I said, oh, we do that. I see like 15 of them sitting around right now. And she goes, yeah, well, I would see why you would think that that's funny, because they don't have running water in Nigeria. And this was said in 2018. Exactly. And it's like, but the point of saying I want to be an educator, I want to be a professor, but you're going into the classroom thinking that people's grandmothers practice voodoo, or thinking that people in Nigeria don't have running water, or any of these other wide misconceptions. So you really have to focus on educating yourself about different cultures and immersing yourself in other cultures before even thinking of how can I make this change for my students. You have to make the change for yourself first.
Wait, can you repeat the question one more time? I'm sorry. I'm old.
What? That was good. What's one way that we can make a substantive change in higher education, specifically regarding race relations?
Acknowledging when you've messed up. One of my professors, I don't remember what professor, but they made a mistake. They said something, a microaggression, and right then and there they said, you know what, I messed up, and I apologize. So they took accountability for the action that they took right there on the space, and we talked about it. And I think that's one substantial thing you can do. We've all made mistakes. We've all said microaggressions. We've all said something prejudiced or racist at one point in our lives. So just when it happens, say you did it, take accountability for it, and move forward and make a change and address those people that you've hurt.
Anybody else? Yeah, good. Go ahead.
I would love for this not just an AU problem, but I would say collegiate nationwide to stop faking how diverse you are. Stop faking how diverse you are. If you can look up, because I did it in preparation for this because I was curious, how diverse is American University? and some website came up and it was like, if you're looking for a diverse university, like American University is a great choice. And I'm like, it's already been said on the stage. Like, I've walked into a classroom and every single person is white. How is that diverse? Like, there's no person in a classroom who does not benefit from a more diverse class. If you want to boast about your diversity, like, actually put in the work to have a more diverse set of students. And you have to think about, what goes into that. It's something that starts all the way with, like, I know that Jason does this often, working with high schools, getting those students prepared for moving into higher education. It starts with, the college recruiters. Sometimes you can go to a high school, speak for 30 minutes, and you'll get X number of applications. But if you truly want to bring, minority students, people of color into your university, it's going to take more than showing up one random day. And so put in the work where it deserves to be put in.
Can we get a show of hands for these amazing students, please? Now we're going to open up the floor. There's mics on both sides. For any of you who have questions for the students or for myself, comments, encouragement, anything.
Can I say something while they're walking up? I'm sorry.
Quickly.
On her point, give the students the money too.
Ooh, please.
I'm just saying that. Just give us some money too.
So, good morning. My name is Jennifer. I'm from Philly, so it's Amir. I'm an educator, mainly supporting young people with developing their post-secondary plans. This conversation, I'm so happy that you all got up on a Saturday morning when you could have gotten breakfast and rolled back over, because that's kind of what I was doing. And I guess for me, the conversation really just, it makes me angry and sad that this conversation is happening almost 20 years after I graduated from college. So I'm a proud alum of Howard University. Yes. And if nothing else, so 2022 will be my 20 years. And I guess for me, it got me okay, I need to go and I really need to, you really affirmed my dissertation. So I'm currently at Temple getting my dissertation, getting my doctorate and working on my dissertation, really focused on HBCUs in particular, because there are some folks that will make the argument that because we live in a post-racial society, which is BS, HBCUs no longer have relevancy. And your comments, really, this whole conversation just validated why HBCUs are so important. One of the things I want to offer to each of you, because I did it myself and I looked it up just to make sure that it was still a thing, consider participating in the consortium here in DC. So when I was a student at Howard, I was able to take classes here at American, at Georgetown, at University of Maryland. And the only stipulation, there were GPA requirements, but the only stipulation was that it had to be courses that were not offered at my home institution. So that was a way for me to experience other educational spaces, but still go back to an environment that I felt welcome, nurtured. It was home, right? And so don't get it twisted. People think, HBCUs are not a reflection of society. The one thing that I can say, HBCUs are very diverse, right? Because again, Black folks aren't a monolith. So I was a swimmer, I was a student athlete. Most of my teammates were from the Caribbean, from African nations, right? And there were pockets of individuals from just other countries throughout the diaspora. And that was the eye-opener, even coming from, I went to private school when I was in elementary school through middle school. I went to a very diverse magnet public high school in Philadelphia. But having that experience just kind of brought everything full circle. So again, I would offer that to you as maybe a remedy and a release. Go to Howard, go home, Go to Mecca if you can, right? The other thing that I would just say, just in terms of like encouragement, find your people and take this information that this experience that you're having here at AU, take it back into your cities, take it back to your high schools to help maybe inform some of the decisions that the young people that are coming behind you may be making about their higher education. Because there's a lot to be said about institutions that may not have the resources and the nice buildings at AU, but are able to produce some dope people, right? And I come from one of those spaces, right? So my question, sorry about that, but my question is for you, I guess, like, what advice would you give to a young person that is seeking to pursue higher education? Like, what advice would you give about things that they need to look for in those institutions that they're pursuing?
Kara.
I would say that they should look at the faculty and look at the research that the faculty is doing. I feel like that was probably the mistake that I made coming into grad school when I was doing my searches, was that I wasn't in tune with faculty and the different things that maybe like their backgrounds or different policies that they were interested in and researching. And that's how I feel like some students coming into college, that they can kind of maybe like align themselves better with the university, is just familiarizing themselves with the professors and the things that they're actually researching to see whether it's going to be a good fit or not.
Thank you.
Whoop. Hello, everyone. Oh, I think I might have broke it. Okay. It's kind of funny. She echoed a lot of what I was going to say. I, too, am a Howard grad. So when you both said that you're from Spelman and FAMU, I was like, yes, HBCU on the panel. I do co-sign entirely with the consortium. I didn't have a chance to do it while I was at Howard, but I definitely considered it for my grad program here at AU. One thing I wanted to ask the two panelists who are HBCU grads, I feel like Howard really prepared me to come into a PWI space and navigate these difficult conversations. A lot of the things that we did in my cohort, especially, we had a cohort of about 40 people, and I'd say about a third of it was people of color. And we really challenged each other to really have these deep, important conversations. I remember one class we had, especially in our very first semester of our program, our professor, who was a white man, he actually kind of backed up and gave us the stage to have the conversation that we needed to have. I don't think he felt comfortable facilitating it. So the students who felt comfortable navigating that space, facilitating the difficult conversation that we needed to have, he gave us the room to do that. And so I think for me, my question is, how did your HBCU experience prepare you for navigating the PWI grad school space that you found yourself in? What skills did you acquire from your home institution, your alma mater, to help you navigate this space?
I struggle with that answer. I went to Spelman College, as I already stated, and so Spelman really prepares you to know who you are racially, who you are as a woman, and who you are in general, outside of those identifiers. So I felt like when I came into an HBCU, like, you live in this utopia at an HBCU. Everybody is different, everyone comes with different backgrounds, but everyone looks like you, and when you speak, it is truth. That's it. You don't have to justify, you don't have to have facts behind what your truth is. It is what it is, right? And coming into a PWI, I felt like, one, there weren't really people that looked like me. And so you have to rest on, okay, these are my identifiers. Like, I have the skills, I'm supposed to be here, but I felt like I struggled because my utopia didn't prepare me. You're going to be educated, you're going to have all these great things, but they don't tell you, like, hey, there's going to be some stuff you have to deal with, and we're going to give you the tools to deal with them. So in a lot of ways, I didn't feel prepared in the way that I needed to be. But as a person, as an individual, yes, I was prepared to enter that space and to just do what it do.
Thank you.
Hello. So I think I kind of lost my comment, but a couple things. I think one of your questions were related to diversity and equity. So, like I said, I'm not an educator, but I'm a nurse practitioner. And when people approach me with the concept of how to integrate and be diverse, I challenge them to, like you said, look at their own bias. You know, fine. If you're a white person, how many black friends do you have? How many Asians? And if you're black, how many Asian friends do you have? How many, so you need to start really looking in your own circle first before you really start doing this hard work. So, but I wanted to kind of approach to something related to what you said, but someone here, a teacher mentioned that she feels like an imposter standing in front of Black students teaching this concept. And from my point of view, I'm also, a lot of us are the one student going into these white classes. So I'm wondering if there are any, and that's probably going to be that way for quite some time. So really trying to prepare students for that. Is there a class or some kind of curriculum that's helping them to really embrace that and to show up? Because, like, for example, I went to an event the other day. I was at a country club. I was the only Black person there. I came home. I told my 18-year-old son, and he says, "Mom, don't look at it as a negative. Embrace it." He says, "There was many times where I was the only Black kid in the class, and you have the opportunity. Yes, you don't want to be speaking for anyone, but you get to show up and show them how powerful, kind of like your race is." But how are we teaching the kids to really embrace that?
Is that for me?
Yes,
Okay.
or whoever wants to speak on it.
I'll take it. I think that's an amazing point, because I think that if you can't understand it, how can you assist in it? And I also don't think that teachers who are white, who are, as we're going to now call you, co-conspirators, should be afraid to do the work, because I think, one, having the understanding that there is an issue is the first step, right? Second, dismantling what already exists is also how you do that. But I think that being afraid to approach conversations, being afraid to be stimulated in a way that you haven't otherwise been stimulated are problematic. For me, like I went to a historically Black college, and the reason why I did that is because I'm from upstate New York. My high school had 26 different spoken languages in it. Right? I lived diversity, equity, and inclusion. It wasn't a buzzword, right? It wasn't a thing that we talked about. Like, my teammates and my friends were Black, white, Asian, and everything else. So for me, it was just a way of life. No one had to sit me down. My teachers were my teachers, right? My motivators were my motivators. All my coaches, were white. Majority of my teachers were white, but within those people, I found people who genuinely cared about me. Right? And I still have relationships with them, even at my historically Black college. All of my major professors were white. Catch that. All of them. Right? And I still maintain relationships with them. So I don't think it's a thing about like not feeling like you can do the work. You got to first understand it, right? And then it's a lot of work that goes in it. Even with us, we got to battle our own imposter syndromes. I had imposter syndrome at HBCU because I came from a diverse place. So seeing all these Black people, I was like, ho. I don't know if I'm Black enough. And I really felt that. And we don't talk about that enough. Right? There's this assumption that we go to these places because we don't have other options. No, I was tired of the diversity. I had never seen a Black male teacher before. Right? I wanted that experience for me, and that helped to shape who I am and for me to be able to do this work. Does that make sense?
Hi, guys. Very quickly, thank you guys for sharing your experiences. Congratulations to you who just graduated. I just graduated with a degree in international training and education. So my question is from the facilitator point of view. You spoke of having a space and needing to feel like you can heal alone. How many of these issues that you guys encountered or were not aware of could have been solved with like an of color or a different type of backgrounds orientation in a continuing space where you're learning about financial aid, merit awards, things of that nature throughout the year to help you, better understand and navigate this world?
You can go to Mary.
For me, I'll say a lot. Having that space to kind of heal would have helped me navigate my first year a little more. A space that I can go into and just see Black and brown people who identify and have, if not all the same values, some, but also knows what it means to be a person of color in America. To understand that your financial aid may be flagged every year that you've applied, and you're trying to figure out how you ask mom and dad for their tax information again after you asked the first time, but now they want you to get a scanned version of it. That's a different experience. I can't call our accountant. We don't have an accountant. Mom and dad is the accountant at home. So being able to go into those spaces and being like, yo, they flagged mine too. You're not the only one. Or, yo, that kid just said that and I don't know how to feel about that. Or how should I navigate this? Or this project is hard, but I don't want to go to anyone else and say I'm struggling with statistics right now when it's statistics 196. So I think those spaces would help students that are in this new environment heal, but also navigate and accept the circumstances that they are in.
Good morning. My name is Sharon Scott. I'm an activist in the Washington, D.C. area. I recently attended the hearing on Capitol Hill with Sheila Jackson Lee in reference to the reparations. I noticed there were a lot of young people your age there. I spoke with some people, but I would like to know some of your points of view on reparations, whether should it be money put back in the community or just simply making amends for slavery. What is your point of view?
Me or the students?
The students, I would like.
Okay, I'll start. So, so my second semester of graduate school, I actually wrote a paper on reparations and what they look like. So I took a class on reconciliation and justice. And so towards the end of the class, we wrote papers. And I was like, oh, I'm going to write on reparations. Because the white girl was writing, and I was like, oh, I'm going to do it. Anyway, so I struggle with reparations and what they look like. They are definitely necessary. For me, I can trace back to my grandmother and great-grandmother were sharecroppers. So that plantation is still standing till this day. It's actually a hotel. So for me, reparations are necessary. Now, what they look like, it's hard because you're talking about addressing a structural issue. There were slaves before the Constitution, right? So for me, it looks like addressing the structure. It looks like loans. It looks like giving people employment. But then it's like, if you give reparations, does it null void the continuous racism that will take place after you give the reparations? And who gets the reparations, right? So is it people that were enslaved here? Is it first generation people that still experience racism? Like, what does that look like? So I still struggle with the response because memorials don't do justice for reparations. There has to be acknowledgement. There has to be accountability. A sorry letter is not it. How much money? What is that? Who's tallying the money? There's just so many more questions, but it is necessary and it has to be done.
Appreciate that response. Get that out.
I could listen to this panel all day, right? They were amazing. We appreciate the student panel's courageousness and bravery to be able to share these stories. And I remember Dr. Engram asked a question about, what do you wish you could have said in the classroom space? And all of you mentioned something. And so I hope that you go into this new semester and have that in your mind. Let me not sit back. Let me challenge. And it's a great place for you to do that. Thank you for sharing.